one of the people coming to the class, I remember, came to me, wanted to speak to me privately. And he came to my office. I remember very clearly it was a Friday, and we were speaking, and he started telling me stuff that I thought, first I thought he was just lying. He's just making it all up. He said to me, then this line he threw out that I remember that like really got my attention. He said to me, I know this may sound strange to you, and I hope you don't judge me, but I learned love from a dog. Those were his words. And he said to me, continued, I had an alcoholic father who was highly abusive, come home very often in a stupor, would beat my mother, and I was the oldest son, and I would often get in the way just to protect her, and he would beat me with a chain. It's a baseball bat, actually, not a baseball bat. And it was sometimes so unbearable and so painful, I would go out to sleep in the garden near the kennel where we had a dog. And it was the dog that would soothe me and give me some calm. And that's where I learned love, not from my father, definitely not from my mother, who was constantly, the way he put it, was an enabler or just this professional victim. Not that he blamed her, but that idea. I remember I was a young man at the time, and I was thinking, is he like exaggerating? Is he making this up? Is he trying? I mean, why would he tell me this? I was so out of the scope of my experience, and I didn't see myself as completely naive either at the time. But I realized I was very naive, because some things are so horrendous you can't even imagine because it's not in your experience. I didn't even have a framework for it. I never heard anything like this. And then, the way I saw him pouring his heart out, I realized he was sincere. And with time I learned, unfortunately, that there is not one, not two, but more than a few situations like this in this world. And I came to discover that actually not necessarily such extremes, but dysfunctionality, unfortunately, has become the norm. And it's an anomaly to find a very healthy, functional home and family. But the thing that why I'm sharing all this is not just to share with you this emotionally wrenching story, but over time I came to realize we live in a very cruel world, and just because I was sheltered or protected, and thank God never experienced anything like this, that unfortunately it's more common than not. And to me the big challenge was, does the Torah have anything to say about this? Because it's one thing the Torah tells you how to eat kosher, and how to keep Shabbos, and how to eat at a Seder table, and how to pray in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But if the Torah is the Torah of God, and it's a blueprint for life, and we say Chayenu v'Erechemenu, it's our life and our sustenance, does it address stuff like this? Because you don't open up a Chumash or a Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law, you don't find exact descriptions of such psychological situations. And it was this question was not a small academic question. For me, it was a fundamental problem. Because if the Torah didn't address it, then I would say, so one second, so what is the Torah given for? Only for people that are completely healthy? For angels? For people who don't suffer emotionally? Only for people who, is it only about rituals? Does the Torah have anything to say about the psyche? And about the soul? And about emotional and psychological and spiritual issues we struggle with? Now at that point I already had answered the question, because I myself discovered that when you learn the Torah in its full context, it's not just biblical studies or history or even some inspiration, but it's profoundly psychological and emotional and spiritual. And actually that's the essence of the Torah. The rest of it, the Torah speaks B'loshen B'nei Adam. It speaks in the language of man, and it speaks in metaphor. And the history part of it is a very small element of it all. It's not about to tell us the history of Abraham. It's to tell us about Abraham today in our souls, in our lives, and about Isaac and about Jacob. And these people are living on, both in spirit and through us. And when you study Hasidic teachings and Kabbalistic teachings, you learn about the spirituality of Judaism. And you realize, like the Zohar says, that the Judaism has a body and has a soul. The body is the mechanics. What I mentioned before, how do you keep kosher, how do you keep Shabbos, how do you do this, how do you do that, do this, don't do that. But the soul is what is really not taught in most yeshivas. and in most religious environments. And some of the great sages say, the Shalah writes this, the Rameh Mepano, just to quote and cite some sources, they write that the truth is the Torah midaberes, people think Torah is midaberes betachtenim and meramezes belyenim, which means that the Torah speaks about things down here and alludes to things up there, but in truth, they write it's medaberes belyenim umeramezes betachtenim. You're really talking about things up there. It's really a spiritual story. You could say a psychological story about archetypes and about understanding the inner personality that God created us. Remember, He didn't just create bodies. God also created our psyches and our souls. So you say a human being is created in the divine image, which is a biblical statement. What does that mean exactly? What does the divine image look like? That we have souls and we have a personality that has divine elements in it. We can understand God. From my flesh, I behold God. From our flesh, we can understand and appreciate God. And as such, when you look into that soul part, that's where you can address even the most horrendous and definitely lesser psychological dilemmas. And then it was Rosh Hashanah time, a few years ago, and this really became the birth of why I wrote the book 60 Days, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time, where I led a Yom Kippur service in Santa Monica, California. And it was primarily for very secular people. So I had to really make it hands-on, not take anything for granted, really address things in a very personal way. And there was a woman who was that participated, and she later called me, told me she was never at a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur service, and it was very moving for her. She's coming to New York next year. She wants to know if there's a synagogue I recommend. So I recommended a synagogue. And later she told me that it was a fine experience, but it was not as profound that she would like it to be. So she said the next year she considers herself somewhat Jewish, but Zen Buddhist was her so-called philosophy that spoke to her, spirituality. So she asked me and this was not malicious, nonchalantly, she said, maybe I'll spend time at home, Yom Kippur. I'm going to read some of my Buddhist books, meditations. And again, she didn't even mean to say anything that she didn't try to be offensive or anything. It so bothered me that she said that, not so much for religious purposes, but really for competitive purposes, to put it bluntly. What I meant by that was, I realized, kinus suf from Tarba Chachma, they say. I realized, if I cannot convey the richness of Yom Kippur to a Jewish woman who's a seeker, we're not talking about someone who's not a seeker, and she could find more relevance in Zen Buddhist meditations than in Judaism, that's a real failure on our part. In business, they say the customer is always right. Just to blame it and say that young people don't respond because they don't want to commit to mitzvahs or something is really very arrogant. Perhaps what we're telling them is not speaking to their hearts and souls. And we have the rule, Dvarim hayetzim min halev, nechnasim el halev, words that come from the heart enter the heart. So I took it upon myself as a personal challenge. And I said to her, what happens if I teach you some of the Yom Kippur prayers in a relevant way? She said, by all means. So I wrote up some stuff that I sent her, which became the spine and the backbone of 60 Days. I think I wrote about it in the introduction. And it was definitely driven by her challenge, so to speak. She didn't challenge me, but by what she said. And when I did it, it did more for me than I think for her. Because I realized that the prayers of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, as someone who grew up with it and reads it fluently, and Machzor is like a big, thick book, I realized that, I know how to read it mechanically, like many people. It's called lip service. Do I really read all the meanings of it all? There's barely time. I mean, how long would it take, lahavdil, to read a book just of that size if you read it with trying to understand the words? It would take you probably a week. I mean, some people read fast. And here, mind you, it's cryptic, it's poetic, Every word carries who knows how many meanings. And I'm saying it not because I hope you understand that most people just simply cannot read it from beginning to end and understand every word they're saying. So the justification is that God understands. Your soul understands. So as you say it's like you say holy words from the sages before us, from the Torah, from the Bible, from Tanakh, and so on. I'm not dismissing it, but it says in Shulchan Aruch as well that on Yom Kippur it's better to say one prayer with a lot of kavanah than just to say it all. This is not a condoning or justification to do that, but it's about appreciating that it's not just about lip service. And as I did it, I came to realize that the themes of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur are profoundly psychological and emotional and spiritual, more than I ever knew. And I thanked her for this because, in a strange way, she said something that challenged me, that caused me to go dig deeper. And what did I discover? And that's why I'm sharing it all here. I discovered this thing called, in Hebrew, we call it Malchus. So Rosh Hashanah, we talk about Malchus the whole time, about God being a melech, God's a king, you say it 1,000 different ways. We're crowning the king. Shofar, you crown the king, Malchus here, Malchus there. The truth is, the word melech for most of us is a very foreign word. We haven't seen a king. The last time anything we know about a king or queen is Queen Elizabeth from England, which isn't necessarily the meaning of kingship or majesty that the Torah is discussing. So for us, it's a thing from the books, from fairy tales. But we use the word all the time, God the king, and we coronate him as king, and the king, does he accept us, does he not accept us as king here? We change prayers just to say that. What does it all mean? Because I had to explain it to her, and of course to myself then, I realized, what do you mean? It's the essence of it all. And it goes back to the story I shared before about the guy with the abusive father. In the Sefer called Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, which is considered the first Kabbalistic work, some attribute it to Abraham himself, Avram Avinu. It's been translated by Aryeh Kaplan English, so it's available. It's very cryptic, but he tries to explain it to some extent. He's a reliable author, translator. So that's the first time reference is made to what is known, by some of you professional Kabbalists, as the 10 spheres. It's called the Esser Sfirot. Esser spheres, which refer to 10 building blocks and 10 fundamental, you could say, spiritual DNA of the human psyche and of the divine psyche. 10 spheres. And it's actually alluded to in verses. It's not just a Kabbalistic text. We say it in our prayers. We say, L'cha Hashem Agdula Agvura V'Atiferes, that God manifests in different ways, sometimes as great. It's called Chesed, love. Sometimes as Gvura, discipline, judge. Sometimes Tiferes, beauty or compassion. And God has different names. And we use these names constantly in our prayers, in our blessings. Just a blessing everybody makes on food. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem Elokeinu are two different names of God. If you don't know that, it sounds redundant. In English, God our Lord, Lord our God. What does that mean? In Hebrew, Hashem refers to the God as he manifests in compassion. And Elokim, Elokeinu, refers to God as he manifests in nature, in the material world. Concealed. And when we make a blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, we're saying that the transcendent God is one with the God that's within nature. And the beginning of the 10 Commandments, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I'm just showing you how prevalent it is and how it's so overlooked. Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I, God your God. Again, what does it mean? Three redundant terms. God is saying, I took you out of Egypt. I, God, took you out of Egypt. What's I, God, your Lord, your I, Lord, your God, took you out of Egypt? These refer to different manifestations of the divine. But I'm not going to go into that in detail right now. But talking about the spheres, so many of you are familiar with it through my book on the Omer, that the 7 times 7, 49 days between Passover and Shavuos, we count the Omer. In many prayer books, we refer to refining a particular character, personality feature in each of us, love, discipline, and so on. And the final of all the 10 is called Malchus. That's what it's called, Malchus. L'cha Hashem Hamlucha v'hamemshala. Malchus. What is Malchus in simple English? Malchus is dignity, majesty. It means literally kingship, but it refers to the dignity within each of us. And this leads me to what I wrote in the email, and this is the background behind it all. What I discovered in my own unofficial research, that Malchus is the biggest emphasis in the Torah, in Judaism, especially on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We talk about the building of Malchus. And it is the single most important ingredient in the human psyche, in the human being, in our lives. More than love, and more than wisdom, and more than intelligence, obviously more than power and money. Dignity. To feel that you're a dignified human being, that you're worthy, and you're indispensable. Obviously, everything is always appreciated by the contrast. Think of a life where you do not feel any self-esteem, self-confidence, or any type of value. The extreme of it is when you loathe yourself. And people do loathe themselves. So dignity, the essence of feeling that you have something to contribute, is the single most important ingredient, is the assumption or the thesis that I'm presenting here tonight. And the reason I speak about it today is because we come yesterday from Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. Everything in Jewish thought is precise. So the fact that it's 9 is not an accident. 9, the 9th day. Today is the 10th of Av. So you'll find in Jewish thought that number 10 is always the round number, the complete number. The 10 utterances of God. Asar Maimaris Nivra Elam. God created the world with 10 different expressions. You have the 10 commandments, of course. You have the Esr Hilulim, the 10 expressions of praise. Of course, you have the 10 plagues as well, which is like the antithesis of the 10 commandments. I discussed that once here at length. And you have the 10 spheres where it all originates from. So the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, in his book, The Pardes, elaborates on this. That 10 is the perfect number, cycle of 10. And therefore the structure of the universe, the structure of, on all levels, breaks into 10. And here's the quote from the book of the Sefer Yetzirah that I wanted to quote before. It says the following: 10 spheres without substance. Esser sphere is bli ma. That's the expression there. And then goes on and says, Esser v'loy teisha, 10 but not 9. Esser v'loy echad osir, and 10 but not 11. In other words, precisely 10 spheres. And this remains a cryptic sentence. We know the 10 spheres. But what's the focus? 10 but not 11, 10 but not 9. Immediately conjures up Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av is 9. And then I thought about it as well, interestingly, right after 9/11. 9/11, but not 10. And in the mystical teachings and psychological teachings of this theme, it talks about 9 is lacking the 10th sphere. You could have Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, but you're missing Malchus, which means you have a full structure. You have wisdom, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and intelligence and knowledge. Chachma, Bina, Das. So your intellect is complete. Hypothetically, we're talking. Or for those that feel they're complete like that, great. Then you have the emotional spectrum. Chesed, love. Gevura, discipline. Tiferes, compassion. Netzach is endurance, ambition. Hod is humility, yielding, flexibility. Yesod is bonding, foundation. You'd think if someone had those 9, it's like a perfect human being. No. If you don't feel self-esteem, if you don't feel valuable, you could be as smart as the most brilliant person. You feel constantly weak. It all means nothing if you don't feel important, if you don't feel valued, validated. I think I shared this once. You remember, he was one of the early practitioners of the so-called new psychology of the inner child. that they talk about a lot. John Bradshaw. So it was in the middle 70s. He himself, the son of a pastor, alcoholic, and went through plenty of dysfunctionality. I remember seeing this video, which someone gave me, and I was just watching it, not even intentionally, but it blew me away. It's a video of him speaking to a room like this, maybe a group of 30, 40 people. And suddenly everybody was quiet, and he had a CD started playing. But it wasn't music. It was a sound which immediately you recognized we didn't know where. The sound of a heartbeat. Imagine an amplified heartbeat, very loud. So it was pumping, pum, 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 like that. Pum, pum. And the whole room was resonating with his heartbeat. And he let it go for like a minute or two. And you realize for a moment, you realize after a while that it's very soothing, a heartbeat. You know, it almost sounds like the waves of an ocean. It's a rhythm to it, and back and forth, and very, very soothing. And when people, so to speak, got more calmer or soothed, he began to speak. He asked people to close their eyes and to envision what he's going to share. I can't do it as good as he did it. I guess he did it from his heart. Like it was really from a raw place. And he began to speak. He said the following. He said, this is your mother's heartbeat. And you are in her womb hearing this 24/7. Because that's what you hear. A child in his mother's womb hears the mother's heartbeat. Above all. It's close to the heart. And you can imagine in there it probably resonates and it's very... This is what you hear for 9 months. Month after month after month. And he says, and now comes the end of the months, and you've been hearing this sound for all these months. Remember, all your needs have been provided for. No anxieties, no therapy, no sitting in rooms like this and listening to heartbeats, because you have the real thing. And now you're about to emerge, and here's your mother speaking to you. And she tells you that, you know, I've been waiting for you my entire life. And when you come to this world, I will have a special room for you. I bought a special crib with beautiful white linen, fresh, new, to tuck you in, comfortable. Whatever you need, I will always be there for you. And should anyone ever bother you or should you ever be challenged, remember, I'm always there. And he went on like this for maybe 5 minutes. As I said, he just went on and on. I don't even remember all the details. But that was the theme of a mother telling her child after 9 months of a heartbeat. And the heart, remember, the background, we were hearing this heartbeat all the time. And he's speaking to, the mother speaking, and telling the child how much I want you to come to this world, how much I will be there for you, how much I love you, how much everything, how much you mean to me, and so on. By the time he finished, even halfway through, everybody in the room was crying, and so was I. So I knew it wasn't fabricated. It was like unbelievable. It was so resonated. And then finally he stopped, and the heart kept on beating. And it took a good few minutes till everybody came back to themselves. And I realized, and as he explained it afterwards, it didn't even need explanation. Why was everyone crying? Because everyone knew that this is what you deserve. It resonated so much, it was like natural. And obviously we also know how much we didn't get it. As I said, contrasts are very big. You want to appreciate something. You can't appreciate health unless you see the opposite of it. You know, when we breathe and our hearts beat, thank God, we take it for granted, you know. When you go to a hospital, you see someone struggling, you suddenly realize it's a miracle. Anyway, that's a very deep impact on me, and I realized, and I use my own language now, Malchus, that's what a mother conveys to her child, a healthy mother, that you're a king, you're a queen, and you're God's gift. You're not mine, you're God's, and I will protect you because you are so special. Every one of us, when we hear that, knows it's true because it resonates. Not because we have egos or we need to hear we're good people, because it's something about it that resonates. Just like there's something about a heartbeat that resonates. But then we come into a world where, unfortunately, many of our mothers not exactly like that. And even if a mother lives up to the standard, we're going to deal with a lot of challenges in life that are going to undermine your malchus all the time. So think in those terms, then Tisha B'Av, as Rosh Hashanah is the building of malchus and Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av is the destruction of malchus. And that's why it's essentially such a tragic day. Yes, technically the temple was destroyed. The Talmud says 5 other terrible things happened. 5 things happened on this day. 2 temples were destroyed. The other things the Mishnah mentions. But there's a reason they all happen on this day. It's not some random thing. It's because there's an energy in this day that reflects the lack of malchus. There's 9 but not 10. And when you don't have the 10th elusive dignity, all of it is rendered basically meaningless. And that's what Hashem, God, said to the people. He said, you have a beautiful temple. It's more beautiful than the previous temple. The second temple was greater than the first in years and in beauty. It stood 420 years. The first temple, 410. And you bring offerings every day. And you light the menorah. Now in the second temple, the ark already wasn't there, but the first temple had a holy ark as well. But it was a sacred place, a holy of holies. It was God's presence on earth. Jacob, the patriarch, said it. He said, Zeh Sha'ar Shamayim is the gate to heaven. The holy mountain, Temple Mount. Until this day, as the Rambam writes, Kedusha le'zazim imkema, holiness is eternal, is perpetual. The ground itself is saturated with sanctity there. Even today, a destroyed temple, you're not supposed to walk on that sacred ground. There are people who even wonder whether you're allowed to put a note into the wall, because maybe you're, so to speak, entering into sacred ground. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, I'm just saying to that extent. And it's almost 2,000 years, as Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues saw fox running around on the Temple Mount. 2,000 years that it's been desecrated, destroyed. And we still mourn for it. What are we mourning for exactly? A building? A structure? You could build other structures. We're mourning for the divine presence on earth. And the divine presence on earth, in the words of the Torah, is that Tselem Elokim, the divine presence in you and me. In the Torah it says, V'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'seicham. First place, God says, build for me a temple, a sanctuary, and I will rest. What's the end of the sentence? Not in it, in you. It should have said, V'shachanti b'seichai, I will rest in it. I build a sanctuary. That's the sentence, and I will rest in the sanctuary. In English, or in Hebrew for that matter, the same thing. I mean, where's the them? We're not talking about a them, we're talking about a building. Because that's not the case. It's not about God's interested in resting in the bricks and mortar. Interested in resting in the soul and hearts of human beings. The building is a model for that. The building is a conduit, a channel. The Ramah, the great Ramah, the codifier, has an entire book called Teres Ha'elah. Entire book, which dedicates the entire book, is to explain how the temple is a mirror image, as a microcosm of the human being and of all the cosmos. And every part of the temple is a model of us. There are 3 sections in the temple. Like we have 3 sections: the mind, the chest, the heart, the torso, and the legs. So you have the Aron Kodesh Kodashim is like the mind, the central nervous system. You have the heart, and the 2 arms are the 3 vessels in the Kodesh, in the holy. So you have the menorah on the right. You have the shulchan on the left, and you have it's opposite, menorah on the left and the shulchan on the right, and you have the mizbeach, the inner mizbeach, the incense mizbeach, altar, the incense altar in the middle. So you have the structure, and he goes on to all the details. So it was not about a building, it was about people and God, a relationship, and the building was part of it. That's why it was the donations of gold, silver, and copper of the people that becomes the place where the divine manifests. So the divine manifests, we say we are created in the divine image. What does that mean? So here's what it means. You read a little later, after Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, he hides, he conceals himself. And God comes, as the Torah says, comes into the garden, and he asks Adam, Ayeka, where are you? So the question is asked, what do you mean, where is he? God didn't know where he was? I mean, anyone can look around, may have been a large garden, but God could not figure out where Adam was, and it's also God. God knows where he is. So the different commentaries, this question was asked, also posed by a minister from the Tsar, Nicholas, around 200 years ago, a little more than 200 years ago. So there was a man called Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, called the Baal Tanya. And he was imprisoned for a period of time. They informed on him. It's a whole story. But then he was miraculously released, and it became a holiday, a Hasidic holiday, Yutas Kislev, the 19th of Kislev. But in his time when he was in prison, the ministers knew that they had a good catch, and they would come to talk to him. Philosophy, thoughts, ideas, theology. And interrogated him. So one of the questions one of the ministers asked him, posed to him, was, why did God ask Adam, Ayeka, where are you? So the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, answered what Rashi says, the basic answer that you're given. So the minister says to the Rebbe, he says to him, Rebbe, I know that answer. I know what Rashi says. I want to know what you say. So the Alter Rebbe was a formidable person. He stood up, and he looked the minister in the eyes, and he said to him, this is a question that God asks every human being from the beginning of time to the end of time. Adam is the name, the central name of all human beings, is the collective name. And his question God asks is, you're 72 years old. This guy was 72 years old. I don't recognize you. What have you done with your life? I don't recognize the divine image in which you were created. What, you've wandered away and betrayed your destiny. Now this minister was not a small guy. He fainted on the spot when he heard this. Because the Alter Rebbe said it with such intensity, looking into his eyes, and he realized. So Ayeka, God says to Adam, was not about where are you physically. He saw where he is. You know, sometimes you sit near somebody at a table, and they space out, and you ask them, where are you? Of course, you know you see them. What you're asking is, where is your spirit? Where is your mood? Where is your mind and heart? I don't feel like you're with me, so to speak. So physically, you're sitting there, but your whole attention is not there. Your mind, your heart, as I said, your feelings. What happened was, it says in the Talmud that wild animals, predators, will never attack a human being. Because a human being is created in the divine image, and the animals recognize the divine image, and they will not touch a human being. So of course the question is asked, why do we find that animals attack human beings? And the answer is an obvious one, because they don't recognize the divine image. Because a human being can behave in a way that the divine image is concealed. Daniel in the lion's den behaved like it shined on his face. Chachmas Adam Te'er Panav, you see on his face the glow, and the lions didn't touch him. What Adam was being told by God is, you've wandered away from your destiny, from your calling. You've betrayed yourself. That's what I don't recognize. Where are you? Where have you gone? I created you with a divine image, with dignity, with an indispensable role to play, a mission, something unique to contribute in this world, and you've lost it. You lost your way. That was God asking him, and that's what we asked all of us. So we can have a lot of faculties and many tools and many blessings, but the biggest challenge is the world of dignity, Malchus. And it's the hardest one to rebuild. Because wisdom you can acquire. Even love is something that is easier to access. You love, you can find people that love you. But that type of inner sense of self, of feeling that you love yourself from the core to the outside, and that you too truly have something unique and indispensable to contribute to this world, is not that easy to teach someone. Now we all have it when we're born, because despite who our mothers were, you were in your mother's womb, you were taught the entire Torah there, the heartbeat, all that came with it. But then we come into this world, and here's where parents come into play. They either reinforce that message and nurture it in you, like you would water a garden, or they don't. And when they don't, what happens is, and this is the tragedy of every abuse, and even abuse that's subtle, like absenteeism. The child begins to question, am I valuable? Am I worthy? And children blame themselves. They say, I must not be worthy because I was hurt. Why do children, for example, blame themselves for divorce of their parents? It's a strange phenomenon. Why would a child blame himself or herself? Parents got divorced. Two adults, they have their problems. Why did the child blame himself or herself? Because children see their parents as God until proven otherwise. And they expect that their parents are perfect. And if something goes wrong, they'll always blame themselves. It's more tolerable for them to blame themselves than to blame their provider. When it's not even true, obviously. So children are, unfortunately, at the mercy of parents. And this is why parents have such a great responsibility and also can do serious damage. But I want to say the good news is they cannot damage the essence of a human being, because the malchus and the dignity of the divine image which you were created was not given to you by your parents. So they can't take it away from you. It was given to you by God. The Bible, the Talmud says that we have three partners. Every child has three partners. Father and mother provide the body parts, so to speak. The blood, the flesh, the bones. The Talmud enumerates it. But it's God that provides the soul. You need a special blessing and you need a third partner. So the divine image does not come from our parents. Yes, as caretakers they can hurt it. They can cause it to be very difficult, but they cannot ultimately take away our soul because they didn't give it to us. Honoring your parents, I remember I did a radio show, when I did radio a few years, when was it? Almost 10 years ago. Wow, time flies. So I chose topics that were not exactly, let's put it this way, conventional. And they usually came out of questions I was asked by people. So it was around Thanksgiving time, time when a lot of people go for home and the holidays. And there's some people who love it and most people hate it. Or I say most, but a lot hate it. As one person told me, I hate that hypocrisy going to these holidays and making believe we're all one big happy family and posing for pictures just to make my father and mother feel good when we all or really all hate each other. So I decided to do a show. It was called How to Honor Parents When They Don't Seem to Deserve Honor. Remember that one, Jeff? So it was a live radio show. I did it on WEVD before it was sold to ESPN. It was like talk radio. It was once Yiddish radio, but this became more talk radio. And that was the show. It was live with calls. It was a very, let's call it this way. In Yiddish they say Lebedik show. Very lively exchange. The phones did not stop ringing, I can tell you that. And not because people were talking about love stories with their parents, that not. So how do you honor parents that don't seem to deserve honor? And the call started, so first I spoke and then I took calls. And everyone had something to say, grievances. You know, classic therapy topic is your mother or your father. Or like those three 80-year-old women who are at Miami Beach and they're all comparing notes about how kind of great sons they have. So one says, my son, my 80th birthday, he came down with the whole family for a week, it was beautiful. The other one says, that's nothing. I have a son, he took us all for a month, a safari in Africa. That's a son. And the third one said, you know, she was like, she felt bad for the other two mothers. She said, my son, he's a high-powered attorney in New York City. Makes a lot of money. Goes to therapy 3 times a week. Pays a lot of money for that. And all he talks about is me. That's a son. See? Right. So, so there's no question, as I go back to radio, everyone was calling in about all these negative experiences. My parents did this, my parents did that. I finally got so desperate. I said, is there anyone out there that has something nice to say about a parent or two? Finally, someone called, but it was and she called complaining about her children. So that was the refreshing difference. So I concluded one or two things. Either This is a scientific conclusion. Either there's nobody that likes their parents in this world, or people who listen to my radio show don't like their parents. Or people who like their parents don't make phone calls. You could also say that. Or they don't call in. And what are they going to say? I like my mother, I like my father. It sounds too straight, you know. So the point I made there, without going into all the details of the show, was this. The Torah does say, honor your parents. But as I said, I learned from my hard-earned experience that not all parents seem to deserve honor. Some of them are extremely, extremely abusive, malicious, and intentionally so. So how could the Torah make a blanket statement? It's one of the 10 Commandments, mind you. It's not a small little detail. It's up there with the 10 Commandments. So interesting, the Torah doesn't say love your parents. Could have said, like, Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which is also a difficult mitzvah. It says, kabed. Yes, another place it says, do not hate. But it doesn't say ohev, to love. That doesn't mean you can't love your parents. It just means the commandment is not love. So the answer to the question, like all good Jewish questions, is with another question. And that is, the 10 Commandments were on 2 tablets. 5 on one and 5 on the next. And they say, it says in holy books, one tablet was Ben Adam Lamakim, mitzvahs between God and man and God. And the other is Ben Adam L'Chaver, mitzvahs between man and man. So for instance, laws like do not murder, do not steal, is all in the second. Mitzvahs like Shabbos, I am your God, do not have false gods, is on tablet number 1. Where's honoring your parents? The fifth on tablet 1. Seemingly honoring your parents is between human beings. It's not between you and God, it's between you and your parents. And yet it's the only one that is on the first tablet. That seems that. And the answer is because honoring your parents is not a mitzvah about your parents, it's a mitzvah about God. You're honoring the life that God gave you through your parents. Which is why, if your parents tell you to do something that defies God's will, you're not supposed to listen to them. It's not some type of blanket statement. It's saying, always respect the life that was given to you. So even the worst case scenario, parents absolute murderers, let's say. Nothing can be worse. Still the commandment is there because it's saying, even if God chose the worst type of parents to send your soul to you, because it came, do not desecrate you, your life, by not honoring the life that was given to you through your parents. And the honoring is of the parent within them, not the beings themselves. Now, of course, if they merit and they are good parents, then of course, much more than you're not just honoring the life, which is the minimal, you're also honoring them as giving you and nurturing you and providing and all the things that they gave you, and even loving them. But the minimum, the Torah says, is to never desecrate the idea that you are a child. And those that go through real healing, dealing with parental issues, ultimately figure out a way to separate between the crime and the criminal, meaning never allow your parents mistreating you as meaning that you're worthless. You're not. What they did is their problem. And yes, and there are people who should not be speaking to their parents the rest of their lives. It's not like some rabbis will say, no, you have to always, it's not true. There are people who parents hurt them in very serious ways, and you have to get out of the line of fire. That's also a mitzvah in the Torah. Obviously, case by case, it has to be determined. So you ask, how do you honor your parents if you're not speaking to them? Yeah, there's a lot of ways to honor them. You could honor them by saying a psalm for them every day and hoping that God protects them and redeems their souls. There's many ways you can honor people without necessarily doing what they want you to do. Because remember, honoring your parents is not about what they want you to do for them, it's what God wants you to do. So Rabbi Akiva honored his mother, who, as she got older and senile, would walk sometimes outside on barefoot, on glass, and he would get down on his hands and knees, this great sage, and make sure she doesn't get hurt. You could say he should have put her away in some type of hospital. She was senile. Let him hire somebody to walk. He has to humiliate himself, because that was honor. Now, in his case, his mother was a special woman. But my point is, it wasn't honoring just her, it was honoring the whole, it's honoring God, it's honoring the mother that gave him life. So, The point in all of this is that our dignity can be concealed, but it can never be destroyed. So the Holy Temple was destroyed, but not the dignity within it. That's why till this day, as I said, the holiness never disappears from that space. The physical body is not there, the physical structure. And today we rebuild the temple first by rebuilding it within Shechanti B'Seicham, within our hearts and souls. So it begins with building your divine image. The Shalosh says that the mazel of this month, the sign of this month, that's not what the Shalosh says, but the mazel, the sign of this month is Aryeh, Leo, lion. Aryeh. In Hebrew is a lion. That's what it says in the Talmud. Every month has its sign. Aryeh, the Shalosh writes, is a Rosh Tevis, is an acronym. Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah. So it's interesting. The month of destruction, the month of Tisha B'Av, becomes the acronym for everything that will follow the greatest days of the year. The whole month of Elul, which is a month of compassion and love, Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, the 13 divine attributes of compassion, of mercy. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hoshana Rabbah, which is like this conclusion of the Piska Tova, as they call it, the conclusion of the Day of Judgment. It's when everything is sealed. All born out of the mazel, the sign of this month. Because for Jews there is no such thing as destruction. A building is destroyed only to build a bigger building in its place. If for any reason a person's dignity has been violated, and any way that our malchus has been somewhat compromised, the Beis Hamikdash, the Tzelem Elokim, in some way has been abused. So yes, it's terrible, and we sit shiva for it, and we cry, and we fast. But we rise up from the ashes, and the same day when the destruction of the temple, Mashiach was also born, as the Medrash says. We said yesterday, Nachem, by Mincha time, in the afternoon, prayer when we put on tefillin because of Tisha B'Av, Nachem is said. Nachem is a prayer of consolation. So the Arizal says the reason is because Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av afternoon, of all times. The worst time of the destruction, the flames were at their highest. Because there's no such thing as destruction, a dead end. Everything births something greater. That doesn't justify it, and it's not so fine a way for consoling us. We'd rather not go through the destruction or the challenge. But there's no such thing as it's over. So we come today, the 10th of Av, and life goes on. And number 10 is supposed to complete that which was missing in number 9. That's Malchus. In 5 days from now will be the 15th of Av, the full moon. And the Mishnah says there were no great holidays among Jews as Yom Kippur and the 15th of Av. Imagine equating the two. As I just said, the mazel of this month builds Yom Kippur. Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hoshana Rabbah. So there's something that is born out of the challenging times like this month that adds and creates a higher potential for dignity. And what is the moon? That will be full in the 15th of Av. The moon itself is Malchus. We say David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim by the blessing of the moon. Why? Why are we suddenly invoking David, King David? Because Lavana is like King David, Malchus. The Zohar says, Malchus lesla megarma klum. The moon has no light of its own. It reflects the light of the sun. But within that reflection, within its ability to receive and absorb, lies more power than the sun carries. So the Talmud equates. It says, Jews count and are compared to the moon. David hu hakotan, Yaakov hu hakotan, which means just as the moon waxes and wanes, the sun is consistent light all the time. The moon goes through phases, and it waxes and wanes. And just as when it disappears, only to be reborn again. And what did God show Moses? Of all things, the first mitzvah in the Torah, the first thing God shows Moses as a preparation for them leaving Egypt seems almost strange when you read it. Jews are suffering. Pharaoh is bathing in the blood of Jewish children. 210 years of this bitter exile. And what does God decide to do? He's going to show Moses the moon. It says smack right in the middle of Egypt, middle of the night, God points to the heavens and says to Moses, "Achedesh hazeh lachem." Here, this hazeh. He points to it. This will be your sign. This will be the new year, the new month, the new moon. Everyone asks the question, what did God point to? A new moon doesn't look like anything. What does it look like? A new moon is invisible. So there are different commentaries. Some say he showed him this is the stage right preceding the new moon. Some say it was the first crescent, the first sign of light. There are different interpretations. But on a deeper level, psychological level, you can say God showed him this is the birthing. Birthing will be invisible. You will not see it until time passes. So don't think that this whole destruction and all the 210 years is meaningless. As difficult and as dark these times are, I show you now that just as this moon disappeared and is reborn again, so too will you be. Shehem Hasidin l'schadish kamei, so that you too will be reborn again. The sun doesn't carry such a message. The sun has other messages. But Yisrael daimim l'levana, not l'chama. Jewish people are compared to the moon. And look at our history. Exactly that, waxing and waning. How many obituaries have been written for the Jews? Right after World War II, who would believe that there'd be a renaissance? But it happened again and again. It's undeniable. And anyone that's gone through individually through healing knows this to be true. I have seen the greatest refinement and the greatest beauty and dignity in the people who've suffered most. That doesn't mean everyone who suffers has gotten to that stage yet. Many still broken by it, bitter. And this is also not a justification. Don't get me wrong. We all wish it wouldn't happen. But those that have come through the fire have a glow about them that is beyond anything possible for a person who's not gone through that. They say the exile in Egypt, the Torah says, compares it to Kur HaBarzel, to a melting, to a furnace that burns through the metal and hardens it to the point that it can never be broken again. That's what suffering is like. And again, this is not a condoning or justification of suffering. We challenge God not to allow that to happen. But it means afterwards, even though there's a Tisha B'Av, not to think that it's over. On the contrary, what it gives birth to is a dignity that is incomparable to the dignity that came before. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, second time, on Yom Kippur, he had a glow on his face, Karen Hoytpanav, that he did not have after the first time. There are some opinions that that glow was after the first, but most believe that it happened only after the second. Moses, the first time he received the Torah at Sinai, the first tablets, he was with God for 40 days, 40 nights before the golden calf. And he doesn't have such a glow. The glow came through forgiveness. When God said, Salachti kidvarecha, I forgive you like you asked me to. Because it took 40 days for Moses to receive the law, the Torah. It took 80 days for him to receive forgiveness and hope. And Yom Kippur is the birth of hope. So Yom Kippur in many ways is the conclusion of where we are right now. Because remember, if you look at the sequence in the calendar, Jews leave Egypt, Passover. 50 days later, they receive the Torah at Sinai. 40 days later, Moses comes down from the mountain with the tablets, sees the golden calf and shatters the tablets. He goes back on the mountain. 17th of Tammuz is when that happens. Beginning of the 3 weeks is the first tragic event. He comes back 40 days. 40 days he spends up on the mountain, including Tisha B'Av and all these days. Comes back on the first day of Elul. And then he goes back for a third time, Elul, which concludes on Yom Kippur. So really, Yom Kippur is 120 days exactly from Mount Sinai, Shavuos. 3 40s. First 40, very nice 40 days. Moses is studying the whole Torah. Little does he know what's going on down on earth till God tells him, Lech Reid, go down there, there's trouble in paradise. And then begins the tragedy. Moses shatters the tablets, he goes back up. praying for forgiveness. And he doesn't get it easily. It says that these days are days of wrath. God is not very cooperative. But Moses insists and does not give up. It's fascinating if you think about it. Moses defying God. God said, I will destroy them. They betrayed me. 39 days after they heard, don't build false gods, they built a false god. What could Moses say to defend them? It wasn't like they made a mistake. It was very deliberate. They heard, they were very evolved people, they were not ignorant. But Moses saying to God, I will not leave here until you forgive. Because human beings are flawed. I'm paraphrasing. Human beings are flawed. What do you want me to say? That we're going to build another nation, and they're also going to make a mistake or two, and then you're going to destroy them, and it's a vicious cycle. I need you to tell me that there's a back door, that there's hope. No matter anything, the worst thing happens, there's a way out. And God said, no, no, no. It took Moses 80 days. We don't know everything that happened there, but some things we know. We read about it in the book of Exodus, Kisisa, the chapter. And you see that Moses has a very powerful exchange with God about many things. I discussed some of it last week. And ultimately, who prevails? Moses. Now you wonder, what would he do after 80 days if God had said no? Well, if you know Moses, he wouldn't give up. Here you have this week's chapter. Veschanon is the gematria of 515 because Moses prayed 515 prayers not to go that God allow him to go into the land of Israel. 515 prayers. And then God finally says to him, enough, stop praying. I will not fulfill this prayer. Well, why God had to wait 515 prayers? I mean, if he was going to say no, he should have said no at the outset. There's many answers given for this. Clearly his prayers achieved something. But Moses was not a man to give up. That's the bottom line. And Moses was a man of dignity. Dignity does not give up, even with God. You can tell me anything, but you're not going to tell me there's no hope. Because if there's no hope, there's no life. Because all human beings are going to make mistakes, and some of us, it's hopeless. What can I tell the human being? That once you make a mistake, it's over? Might as well die? It doesn't work that way. And and Moses prevailed. We say it right after Kol Nidre, the opening of the holiest day of the year. Salachti kidvarecha, which is powerful. God is saying, I forgive because as you demanded it, your words I fulfill. Now is not the place to go into discussion, what did God think? Why did he push him to, what God didn't know he would forgive? Why did he have to wait 80 days? But whatever the reason is, Moses broke down the door, the wall. You know the story of Acher? Acher, there was a man called Elisha ben Avuya in the Talmud. Great, great sage. But then he lost his faith. However you explain it. He became an apostate. And after that, they called him no longer Elisha ben Avuya, they called him Acher, a dismissive name. Acher means the other. You know, very, very derogatory name. But the Talmud has a fascinating story about this Acher, even afterwards. I want to share with you something from Reishus Chachma, which is a great book, holy book. But you need to know the story first. Acher remained a scholar, but he desecrated Judaism. Rabbi Meir was his great student, one of his great students. He would go study with him, and when he was criticized, how could you study with a man like that? He said, Klipase zarak v'pri echel. I eat the fruit, but I'll throw out the peel. It was once on Shabbos, and Acher was riding on a horse. And Rabbi Meir was studying Torah with his great teacher, walking on at the side. And Acher was desecrating Shabbos publicly. And they're walking and walking, and they come to a point out of the city. And Acher, being so brilliant, says to his student, Rabbi Meir, you know, we've reached the Tchum Shabbos. We've reached the border where, according to Torah law, there's a certain place you're not supposed to walk further unless there's an Erev, unless there's a special situation. Acher, the person riding on a horse, is reminding Rabbi Meir that we've come to a point where you're not supposed to walk further. Quite ironic. So Rabbi Meir wisely says to Acher, why don't you come back with me? Which he meant, of course, was not just was meant to come back to faith. And Acher said, for me it's too late. Because I heard in heaven was a decree, a baskol, that says, Shuva Banim Shevim, everybody should repent, should do tshuva, chutz ma'acher. Everybody except me. So I realized will never be accepted. And then the story continues. It's a really powerful story about Acher. I believe my son, when he did the who's who of the Talmud, he covered this in detail. You can see it online. When he dies, Acher finally, his crimes were so intense, it was such desecration, such betrayal, that it says even hell didn't want him. Even Gehenna didn't want him. So his soul hovered over his grave. Until finally Rabbi Yehuda, they prayed for him to be allowed into hell. Can you imagine? So the Reishus Chachma says that when he came up to heaven, he was reprimanded, not for his crimes. Why didn't he break down the door and demand to be allowed in? Like Moses broke down the door. So he claimed, his argument was, because I heard from you, from God. Shuvah, everybody does shuvah except Acher. Everybody can repent except me. They said, but you're the scholar. You also know there's a halacha, there's a law that says, Kol masha ba'al habayis emelecha asay chutz mitzay. Everything that a host tells you to do, you're supposed to listen to. If someone invites you to their home, so you came as a guest, it's respectful. You're supposed to listen to your host, except one thing. If he tells you to leave, I don't mean at the end of the meal, because then nobody would leave, but we're talking about like the middle. So who's the ultimate Baal Habayis? Who's the owner of the universe? God. He also follows these laws. Magid Dvarav Yaakov, God follows the laws he gave the people. So it says that you listen to everything the owner, the boss tells you, except if he tells you to leave. So just because you heard chutz ma'acher, you shouldn't have listened. You should have broke the door down. It's an amazing thought. Now we're talking extremes here. To bring it back to our level, the bottom line is there's no such thing as hopeless, period. That's why Yom Kippur is such a holy day. I don't know if you ever thought about it when you're in Yom Kippur services. That's the bottom line. There's no such thing as hopeless, because the dignity, the malchus of a human being, even if it's completely concealed, like when God asked Adam, where are you? Or like on the 9th of Av, 9 but not 10. Or in any form, it can never be destroyed, period. The challenge is, how do you reconnect to it and how do you rebuild it? And that's why I want to share a few words about that. So we also learn from Tisha B'Av about that. Tisha B'Av is not just about a day of crying and sadness. It's about awareness. The first thing is awareness. Awareness of any problem is half the cure. Tisha B'Av is not about just sitting and wallowing in our own misery. What kind of mitzvah is that? It's about awareness. It's about awareness of what's lacking so you can know what to rebuild. The temple's destruction was a tragedy at the time, but it ends up being a blessing, because had the temple remained standing, it would have created the illusion that everything is just fine. And it wasn't fine. They say in healing, silence, breaking the silence, is one of the strongest things in any healing environment, because, not to use harsh words, but I'll use the example, they say the silence is worse than the rape. Silence that follows a crime is always worse than the crime. Not worse necessarily than the crime itself, but the invalidation that a person can't cry out. When a child is told, no, nothing happened to you. Nothing, everything is fine. It's all good. Or, you must be mistaken, that person could never be that way. That's far worse than the crime, because what it does is, it doesn't even let you cry. It doesn't allow you to even validate that you feel bad. And that is a violation of Malchus. The crime itself is a violation, but a violation of your dignity, that you don't have the right to cry, to say this is not right, this is wrong, that's unacceptable. And that is ultimate abuse. So, in healing you have breaking the silence. Obviously sometimes it goes to the extreme. Like that story with this Jewish guy. He calls up the priest and says, I want to speak to you, I want to confess. And the priest is so impressed that a Jew is coming to confess to a priest. And he starts telling the priest all his crimes and all his sins. And the priest is like, relishing in he got this new Jew. And then finally he says to the Jew, he says, tell me, what made you see the truth to come to me to confess? He says, don't take it personally, I'm telling everybody. is sometimes you break the silence and there's no limits, which happens because like a kettle that has been sealed for so long, a kettle, the spout, is the release. When a person cries psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, it says, it's a Hasidic saying, that tears bathe the neshama. They bathe the soul. Tears are a release. It's like a kettle that has a lot inside of you, and tears, moisture and moichin, it's like an explosion. Sometimes it's tears of joy, sometimes tears of pain. Rabbi Akiva Zolgu Ein of Demaz. Rabbi Akiva's his eyes were dripping with tears when it was revealed the secrets of the inner Torah. Sometimes it comes because it's beyond you, so it's a way of release. What happens if a person is not allowed to cry? And I've met individuals who were told you're not allowed to cry. Only babies cry. One guy told me once, 40 years I haven't cried. If I start crying, I don't think I'll ever stop. What happens when a person is not allowed to express their pain? You think nothing happens? It's called implosion. You start tying your body up in knots. Your whole inside. Think of a kettle that the steam is not allowed out. What will happen? It'll either explode or it will implode. The pressures that will start building up inside of a person, even physically. The body will become so tight with all the knots that come from such internalization that doesn't allow expression. That's why Pesach, Passover, it's called Pesach, a mouth that speaks, because the greatest freedom is to speak. To be able to ask questions, is to be able to challenge, is to be able to express yourself, which is the whole point of the Haggadah, V'gada Talavincha. Tell your children, make them speak, have them speak, share. It's not just about silencing or quieting somebody. So in that sense, Tisha B'Av is a day where we are not silenced. We speak, we cry, we share, we break the silence, we say there's a problem. But the day after Tisha B'Av begins the rebuilding. So firstly, finding people you trust that you can express yourself to and not just keep everything bottled up is a very healthy thing. It's the first step, however. The next step is finding people you can trust that help you rebuild. And rebuilding means learning how to nurture yourself. Not learning to get a caretaker, but learning how to nurture yourself. Learning how to find healthy friends that support and don't undermine you. And learning how to build up. And we have a method. Judaism has a method. It's called Torah Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. It sounds religious sounding, like study of Torah, charity, prayer. But they're also powerful, very powerful psychological tools. That says that the whole world stands on them. But starting with Elam Katan, it starts with our personal world stands on these things. It means occupying your mind with things that are of elevated nature. Instead of being consumed with that which breaks you, with that which you are bitter or angry about, studying and refined ideas help bring your mind to a more refined place, and being less consumed frees you to some extent. It's like someone once told me, I think, who was it, Joseph Telushkin spoke about this once. Now when you carry your mind, in your mind, what others have done to you, you're giving rent-free space inside of you to them, basically. And also the opposite. By allowing yourself to be occupied with things that are positive, just crowds out and leaves less room for the negative. And things begin often from the mind. That's not the total solution. And I'm not saying it's easy. It requires real discipline, commitment, to start learning and studying things and get your mind involved in some things that are pure, transcendent, spiritual, refining, elevating, empowering. And then there's a second, that's Torah. Torah is connected to the mind. And then there's Avodah. Avodah Shebelev, emotion. Working on your emotions. Prayer really is emotional exercise. That's really what it is. It's not just about saying words. Talmud says, what's the service of the heart? It's prayer. We've lost the art of prayer. The people know how to read the words, and people maybe know the Hebrew, but it's lip service. Emoting, to be able to emote, to sit quietly for a man, let's say under a talus, for a woman in her own way, and speak to God from your heart. You think that's an easy thing to do? It's easy to speak emotionally, openly, intimately. You need courage for that. You need words. You need strength. And then finally there's action. Acts of chesed. When you are generous and giving, it generally makes you less depressed and less self-consumed. That's how it is. Because the arrow that points inward can take on two shapes. Narcissism or arrogance is not always the shape of being pompous and then so full of yourself that you think you're better than everyone. It could also take the shape of self-loathing. When a person says, I'm worthless. That's also a form of narcissism and arrogance. Because what do you mean? Who are you to think you're worthless? God says you're not. And says, well, I know better. I know myself better than anybody. I know I'm worthless. That's an arrogant statement, except it takes on the shape of valuelessness. So these three things of consuming your mind, working on your heart, and in actions, being giving, charitable, kind, giving to others, says, HaMispal ba'ad chaverei hu nena tchila. When you pray for someone else, you give to someone else, God responds first to you in your need. I don't know if that's a gimmick or not. I don't think you can do it as a trick. You know, you really feel about compassion to another, opens up channels of compassion to you. That's how it works. I find that many people who are involved in healing themselves, you'll see very often have helped heal others. But it takes time and it takes effort and it takes discipline. So here we are, the 10th of Av, day Isru Chag. Oh, they call Tisha B'Av is a Chag, holiday. I don't know if 10th of Av you can call actually Isru Chag technically, but the idea of the day following a holiday. Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av will be the greatest holiday. So here we are the day after, and the message of number 10 is very clear. The greatest destruction, betrayal, intrusion, and abuse happens on the level of Malchus, more deeper than any other of the spheres. You know, you can contaminate someone's mind, you can contaminate their heart, but if you undermine their dignity, their self-worth, self-esteem, you take away their tools. But it also tells us that it's not all destroyed. We can rebuild. And we do rebuild. And from Aryeh, from the month of Av, we build Elul. From these days, Moses on the mountain was born and conceived the month of compassion, Elul, that leads into Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah Rabbah. So we see that these days have the power to create a new dimension, a new level of dignity and glow, shine, that we didn't have until now. So know, everyone should know, all of us, unconditionally, that you have an indispensable contribution to make, period. And then think of it this way. How much of your time and energy is invested in discovering your indispensable contribution, and how much of it is invested in fighting demons and anger and fear and all the other forces that others have imposed upon us. And then think, it's your sacred life and your sacred time and your sacred spirit, and how much are you allowing others to continue to occupy that place. We have inside of us, as I said, the indispensable Malchus. And that is something each of us can access. Good friends and mentors can help you access it. But never ever think it's not there. There's no such thing as not there. It may seem sometimes invisible, like the new moon, but it's there, and nothing can take it away from you. To me, if I could be able to convey a message like that and convince anyone that has felt hopeless at times, that is well worth a life to teach that message. So I say that as far as the Meaningful Life Center. The name Meaningful Life grew out of my book called Toward a Meaningful Life, but I came to learn that it actually is basically the building of meaning. That you and everything you do is significant now and forever, and that you have, as I said, an indispensable musical note to play that nobody that ever lived and or ever will live can play but you. And the entire world is not complete until you do it. So may you all, this 10th of Av, as we go from Tisha B'Av into better days, build up our dignity, each of us, your dignity, my dignity, and help each other in that regard. You never know, a kind word, what you can say to somebody can do for them if it's coming from the heart and it's validating them. See, what do children need most? I've asked parents this question many times. What do you think your children need most? Everybody has their answer. Children are most, cherish most, that you make them feel that they are valuable, that they're worthy, which really means just being aware that they exist. More than any gift you can buy, and more than any trip, and more than anything, is just making them feel you're aware, you're valuable, and you're worthy of me to spend time with you. The opposite, obviously, is parents who are too busy, and their claim is that I'm too busy creating security for my children. And in the process, they make their children more insecure than ever, because it's not that money that gives them security, but it's awareness that you care. And adults get caught up in their games, and they're busy, and they don't have time for childish stuff. So they find babysitters and nannies and video machines and replacements. But there's nothing that will ever replace a mother cradling a child, a father lifting a child. There's nothing that can replace that, because that is ultimately how we nourish the malchus within each of us. And even if one of us, if any of us have been deprived of that to some extent, there are many ways, alternatives that can be created. It's obviously best to always get it young, nip it in the bud, as they say, but that doesn't mean, as I said, it's not hopeless. There are ways to replace it. If you're aware that you need it, there are ways to find alternative bypass surgery, so to speak. Here's not the place to go further. We are in details of how, but I'll discuss that in a few weeks, in the coming weeks, because it's all part of this rebuilding of malchus and dignity. It'll be part of the themes of our discussions here. So with that being said, I want to wish everybody a very dignified week, dignified life. It shouldn't just be a week. And we are here in any way to help you build your dignity, and hope you can help us build our dignity as well. And again, the class is dedicated by our good dear Philip in honor of his wife Nancy for Shlema and for her birthday. And mention this? Yeah, tomorrow night. So tomorrow night is a social evening here with Shimon Tzukarnik, a unique type of evening. You're all invited. More details you could ask Velvel or in the front. Philip is giving his class tomorrow, 7 o'clock, and this is when? 8? Okay. So 7 is Philip's class, and 8 o'clock is this event. And so I bid you all a very pleasant evening. It was an honor speaking to dignified souls like yourselves, the divine image. I'm not here to say whether Ayeka, where are you or where you're not. That's up to God. But I think I see you all to some extent. And hopefully you see yourself, not just in the mirror, but your inner divine image. Thank you, and have a good night.